The crystal chandeliers in the grand reception hall cast a warm golden glow, but I felt freezing cold. My sister, Clara, stood in the center of the dance floor in her stunning white gown. The music had just faded and everyone was looking at us. I had walked up to give my toast, holding a glass of sparkling cider. Instead of smiling, Clara reached behind the head table and pulled out a stained black waiter's apron. She shoved it hard into my chest. "Put it on," she said, her voice echoing through the silent room. I stared at her, completely confused. She let out a loud, mocking laugh and pointed straight at the catering staff near the kitchen doors. "You belong over there," she sneered, making sure the microphone caught every word. "Not here with the family." The guests gasped. A few hundred pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. I stood frozen in shock, my face burning with deep embarrassment. My own sister was doing this to me on the biggest day of her life. I opened my mouth to speak, but she leaned in close, her eyes filled with cold hatred. "After today you shouldn't even show your face here again." Heart pounded in my ears like a heavy drum. Every instinct told me to drop the apron and run out the front doors. But I refused to give Clara the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I forced a stiff, unnatural smile, gripping the rough fabric of the apron. Without saying a single word, I turned away from the microphone and walked toward the kitchen. Inside, I was completely crushed. My stomach twisted in painful knots. As I moved slowly toward the service area, I glanced at the tables closest to the dance floor. My aunts, uncles, and cousins were all sitting there, watching this public humiliation unfold. Some looked surprised while others just stared at their plates. Not a single person stood up. Not one person told Clara to stop. I tied the apron around my waist, feeling like a complete outcast in my own family. Why was everyone allowing this to happen? I walked past a table of older relatives, keeping my head down to hide the tears stinging my eyes. Just as I passed, I heard one of my elderly aunts lean over to her husband. She whispered, "He still doesn't know." Stopped for a fraction of a second, the elderly aunt's words echoing in my mind. What didn't I know? I looked desperately toward the head table, searching for my mother. Surely she would put an end to this cruel joke. But when I finally caught her eye, she didn't look angry at Clara. She didn't look sympathetic either. My mother quickly looked away, picking up her water glass with a blank, unbothered expression. She was acting like my humiliation was completely justified. A cold realization washed over me. This wasn't a sudden bridezilla moment. Clara hadn't just snapped under wedding stress. This was carefully planned and my mother knew all about it. They wanted to embarrass me so badly that I would leave and never return. I grabbed a silver tray from a confused caterer and started walking through the crowd, my mind racing. I was supposed to be the bride's brother, yet I was being treated like an unwanted pest. I squeezed past a high-top table where my younger cousin was standing. As I walked by, my cousin refused to look at me and muttered, "You were never supposed to be here." The rest of the hour was a living nightmare. I was actually forced into service. A catering manager, clearly briefed beforehand, handed me a pitcher of ice water and pointed toward the VIP tables. I walked from table to table, pouring drinks for people I had known my entire life. The whispers followed me everywhere. "Is he actually working?" one guest asked softly. "I thought Clara said he was a failure, but this is just sad," another replied. I kept my face blank, but my hands shook every time I poured. I could feel Clara watching me from the head table. Every time I glanced her way, she was smiling with deep, toxic satisfaction. She was enjoying breaking my spirit. Some of the groomsmen's extended family, who had never met me, simply assumed I was just hired help. They snapped their fingers at me to ask for more bread. The humiliation sank deeper into my bones with every passing minute. I felt completely erased. As I refilled a glass for a woman on the groom's side, she looked closely at my face, then looked up at the wedding portraits. A guest asks, "Wait, isn't he related to the bride?" Before I could answer the confused guest, a heavy hand clamped firmly onto my shoulder. I turned and saw Arthur, an old family friend who had been my late father's business partner. His face was pale and his jaw was clenched in obvious anger. He gently took the water pitcher from my shaking hands and set it on a nearby table. "Walk with me," he said quietly, his tone leaving no room for argument. He led me out of the crowded ballroom and into a quiet, dimly lit hallway near the coat check. The muffled sound of the wedding band played through the walls. Arthur looked at me with deep sadness in his eyes. Why are you letting them treat you this way? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I don't have a choice, Arthur. They made it clear I don't belong. Arthur shook his head slowly, looking down at the carpet. It's not because you don't belong. It's because they are terrified of you. I stared at him, completely lost. Terrified of me? I was the outcast. He sighed heavily. Your father tried to protect you from this. Hearing my father's name felt like a physical blow. He had passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago. Immediately, a flood of memories rushed into my mind. He was the only person in this family who ever treated me with genuine love. While my mother favored Clara and bought her everything she wanted, my father would spend his weekends teaching me how to fix cars or reading books with me on the porch. He always told me I was his greatest pride. Since the day he died, this house had become a cold, hostile place for me. My mother and Clara had slowly pushed me to the edges of the family, culminating in tonight's ultimate disrespect. I looked up at Arthur, my eyes blurring with fresh tears. Protect me from what? I asked, my voice cracking. Dad is gone. He can't protect me anymore. They've made sure I have absolutely nothing left in this family. Arthur stepped closer, his expression turning incredibly serious. He glanced down both ends of the empty hallway to make sure no one was listening. Then he looked me right in the eye. The friend reveals, before he died, he left something for you. Arthur reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. The edges were slightly worn, as if it had been kept safely tucked away for a very long time. He pressed it firmly into my hands. He gave this to me a week before his heart attack, Arthur explained, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He made me swear to keep it hidden. He told me to deliver it to you only when the truth comes out. My hands trembled as I stared at my father's messy handwriting on the front of the envelope. It simply said, for my son. A heavy wave of confusion and dread washed over me. What truth? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Why didn't you give this to me at his funeral? Arthur shook his head. Because you weren't ready. But after what Clara just did to you in there, it's time. Without waiting for another word, I ripped the seal open. Inside was a stack of aged legal papers and a smaller, folded letter. I pulled the first document out, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. Inside is a document, partially revealing something shocking about his identity. I stared at the top of the paper, barely able to comprehend the words printed in bold ink. It was an adoption certificate. The names listed as the adoptive parents were my father and my mother. But the space for biological parents was left completely blank. My breath hitched. I wasn't biologically related to Clara or my mother at all. That explained the years of coldness, the distance, and the cruel treatment. But as I flipped to the second page, the mystery deepened. It was a financial trust agreement. The document clearly stated that upon my father's death, the vast majority of his private estate and company shares were to be held in a blind trust solely for his adopted son, me. Clara and my mother were only given the primary house and a small stipend. My father hadn't left me with nothing. He had left me with almost everything. He knew they would try to ruin me, so he locked it all away. I was holding millions of dollars in my hands. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors to the ballroom creaked open at the end of the hall. Footsteps approach. The sister has noticed. I quickly shoved the papers back into the envelope and hid it behind my back. Clara marched down the hallway, her heavy wedding gown rustling angrily against the carpet. Arthur stepped back into the shadows, leaving me to face her alone. Her face was flushed and her eyes burned with pure venom. "What are you doing out here?" she snapped, stepping so close I could smell her expensive perfume. "You're supposed to be serving the guests. Or did you finally get the hint and decide to run away?" I stood my ground, my heart racing but my grip firm on the envelope behind me. "Just taking a break, Clara," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She narrowed her eyes, noticing the strange tension in the air. She glanced at Arthur, then back to me. "I don't want you snooping around the coat rooms or talking to my father's old friends," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Do not dig into things that don't concern you." Her aggressive reaction told me everything. She knew. She had always known. Clara took a step closer, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "You were never meant to find that." Clara spun around and stormed back toward the glowing lights of the reception, leaving me standing breathless in the dim hallway. Arthur emerged from the shadows, looking at me with grim confirmation. She found out about the trust a month ago, he said softly. She's been trying to break it legally, but she can't do it while you're still around. Everything started making terrifying sense. My father had taken me in under unusual circumstances, protecting me with his wealth. Clara and my mother didn't just hate me, they needed me gone. The public humiliation tonight wasn't just spite. It was a calculated attack. They wanted to break my spirit, embarrass me so deeply in front of the entire community that I would pack my bags, leave the state and never speak to them again. If I disappeared, they could claim abandonment and seize the trust. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. My father had anticipated their greed. I pulled out the small folded letter he had written. It didn't contain a long emotional goodbye. It was just a few sentences and a business card. The envelope contains a lawyer's contact. The business card belonged to a man named Harrison Vance, a senior partner at a major law firm downtown. I gave Arthur a quick nod of thanks, turned my back on the ballroom, and hurried out the side exit into the cool night air. I stood in the empty parking lot, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. It was late, but the card listed a direct emergency line. It rang twice before a deep, calm voice answered. Vance speaking. Mr. Vance, my name is... I know who you are, the lawyer interrupted, his tone shifting to immediate urgency. Arthur texted me that he finally gave you the file. I've been waiting 5 years for this call. I leaned against the brick wall of the venue. I just read the documents. Am I really the sole beneficiary of my father's estate? Yes, Vance confirmed firmly. Your father structured an ironclad trust. The majority of the company assets and liquid funds belong entirely to you. Your mother and sister only received the residential properties. I closed my eyes, the weight of the betrayal crushing my chest. Vance sighed heavily over the phone. Your sister has been hiding it. Hiding it? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. How could she hide a legal trust? Because you haven't formally claimed it, Vance explained quickly. Your father's instructions were strict. The trust remains blind until your 25th birthday, which is tomorrow. If you don't sign the release documents in person, control defaults to the next of kin, your mother. My blood ran cold. The wedding was tonight. They were trying to drive me out of town the exact night before my birthday. The humiliation, the waiter's apron, the public disgrace. It was all psychological warfare. They wanted me on a bus far away from here by midnight so I would miss the deadline. Clara's cruelty wasn't random, it was a desperate heist. I need you to listen to me carefully, Vance said, his voice dropping to a dead serious tone. Clara's new husband is an investment banker. I have sources telling me they have drafted papers to liquidate your father's company first thing Monday morning. I looked back at the glowing windows of the reception hall. The lawyer insists he return immediately, they're planning something tonight. I hung up the phone and shoved the envelope deep into my jacket pocket. My fear vanished, completely replaced by a cold, burning anger. I walked back into the venue through the kitchen entrance. The caterers ignored me, assuming I was still part of their crew. I moved silently down the back corridor that led to the bridal suite. The door was cracked open just an inch. I stopped, holding my breath. Inside, I could hear Clara and my mother talking in rushed, excited whispers. Are you sure the transfer papers are ready? My mother asked. Yes, Clara replied, sounding giddy. Marcus has his banking team on standby. As soon as the clock strikes midnight, the default clause triggers. We sign the papers at the after-party, and the entire estate is ours. Thank God, my mother sighed. I couldn't stand the thought of him getting a single dime of your father's hard work. Don't worry, Clara laughed softly. After what I did to him out there, he's probably halfway to the bus station by now. There was a brief pause. But what if he stays? My mother asked nervously. His name comes up as a problem. He won't stay, Clara scoffed confidently. He's weak. He's always been weak. He'll run away to hide his shame just like he always does. I stood in the dark hallway, my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. She thought I was weak. She thought years of their emotional abuse had broken me completely. But she didn't realize that my father had left me the ultimate weapon. I reached down and smoothed out the stained waiter's apron that was still tied around my waist. I wasn't going to take it off. I wanted everyone to see exactly what they had tried to do to me. I turned away from the bridal suite and marched directly down the hall toward the main ballroom. The music was loud, a slow jazz song playing while couples danced. The groom, Marcus, was laughing with his groomsmen at the head table. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. I walked right onto the center of the dance floor, grabbed a microphone from a stunned wedding singer and cut the music. The room went dead silent. Before you celebrate, there's something everyone should know. Hundreds of guests turned their heads, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. I stood tall in the center of the room, still wearing the catering apron over my suit. Clara and my mother rushed out of the bridal suite corridor, freezing in their tracks when they saw me holding the microphone. I know many of you thought it was a funny joke when my sister handed me this apron earlier, I said, my voice echoing clearly across the massive room. You thought I was just the family failure. Clara's face turned bright red. She marched toward the edge of the dance floor. Turn that microphone off right now, she screamed, dropping her sweet bridal act entirely. Security? Get him out of here. I'm not going anywhere, I replied calmly. Because I just found out why you really wanted me out of this building tonight. I looked at the crowd. My sister and mother have been hiding my father's legal will from me. A will that leaves the entire family company in a blind trust. Clara let out a forced, nervous laugh, looking around at her friends. He's crazy. He's lying. He pulls out the envelope. I held the thick manila envelope high in the air for everyone to see. I have the original adoption records and the trust agreement right here, I announced. Signed by my father, protecting his assets from the two people who hated me the most. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The whispers started instantly, but this time they weren't mocking me. Guests were staring at Clara and my mother with wide, judgmental eyes. This is a private family matter, my mother yelled, her voice trembling as she rushed forward, trying to block the guests' view. Everyone please go back to your drinks. He's just a bitter, jealous boy. But the crowd didn't move. The tension in the room was suffocating. Several of my father's old business partners stood up from their tables, their faces dark with suspicion. Clara looked frantic. She grabbed her new husband, Marcus, by the arm. Marcus, do something. Throw him out. Marcus looked completely confused, staring at the envelope in my hand. I lowered the microphone slightly and locked eyes with my sister. You can't throw me out, Clara, I said with a cold, steady voice. Reveal's lawyer is on the way. My lawyer is pulling up to the venue right now, I said, my voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. And he has the police on standby. Right on cue, the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Harrison Vance walked in carrying a thick leather briefcase. He looked sharp, professional, and entirely unbothered by the hundreds of staring guests. He marched straight to the dance floor and stood beside me. Good evening, Vance said, his booming voice requiring no microphone. I am the executor of the late Richard's estate. I am here to formally execute the trust transfer to his sole rightful heir. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the finalized legal documents. My mother collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands. Clara's face drained of all color. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Vance turned to face the crowd. Any attempt to liquidate or transfer the family assets tonight by anyone other than my client is legally considered fraud. The room erupted into shocked gasps. The plan was completely destroyed. I had won. The sister panics. Chapter 18. Clara completely lost her mind. The perfect, poised bride image shattered into a million pieces. It's not fair, she screamed, her voice cracking as tears of pure rage ruined her makeup. He's not even real family. He's just some stray dad picked up. I am his real daughter. I deserve that company. She pointed a shaking finger at me, screaming so loudly her voice echoed off the chandelier. That's why I gave you that apron. I wanted you to feel like the garbage you are so you would leave before midnight. You were supposed to run away. The ballroom was dead silent, save for Clara's hysterical breathing. She had just confessed to everything entirely unprovoked in front of 300 witnesses. I didn't say a word. I just looked at Marcus, the groom. He slowly pulled his arm out of Clara's grip. He stepped back, staring at his new bride as if she were a total stranger. He was an investment banker. He knew exactly what fraud charges meant for his career. He shook his head, his eyes wide with horror and disgust. The groom looked shocked, he didn't know. Marcus, please, Clara begged, reaching for him. We can fight this in court. We can still get the money. Marcus backed away, holding his hands up. There is no we, Clara. You tried to use me to steal a company. He turned his back on her and walked straight out the side doors without looking back. That was the final blow. The illusion of the grand, perfect wedding collapsed entirely. Guests began grabbing their coats and heading for the exits, whispering furiously to one another. No one wanted to be associated with a family caught in massive legal fraud. The band silently packed up their instruments. My mother sat frozen in her chair, sobbing quietly, realizing her life of luxury was officially over. Clara fell to her knees in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by discarded napkins and spilled champagne, crying hysterically for her husband to come back. The venue had turned into a graveyard of their greed. I looked at the crumpled waiter's apron still tied around my waist. I slowly untied the strings and let it drop to the floor. Vance handed me a sleek, silver pen and held out the trust release forms. Right there, in the middle of the empty dance floor, I signed my name, officially taking control of my father's legacy. It's done, Vance said quietly, closing his briefcase. I will have the locks changed on the corporate offices tonight. I looked down at Clara, who was still weeping on the floor. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to scream about all the years of pain she had caused me. But as I looked at her ruined dress and her empty wedding hall, I realized I didn't need to. She had destroyed her own life. Vengeance wasn't necessary, the truth had been enough. I didn't say a single word to her or my mother. I just turned around and walked out the front doors of the reception hall, stepping into the cool, quiet night. The chaotic noise of the wedding faded behind me. I took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling a profound sense of peace. I had lost a toxic family, but I had finally found my worth. Quiet strength, dignity, and earned justice.